Hello again. In Chapter 9 of Armageddon Now by Dwight Wilson, the chapter is entitled The Certainty of Survival. Again, we're dealing with evangelical speculations about the future of Israel and the signs of the times back in the 1950s. New insight was available to premillenarians in May and July of 1955 as Moody Monthly opened its pages to spokesmen for both the Israeli and Arab views. Isaac D. Una, vice consul of the Consulate of Israel in Chicago, and Fayez A. Sayegh, an Arab spokesman on leave of absence from the United Nations Secretariat, each were given opportunity to express their views and offer rebuttals. It was particularly unusual for readers to be provided with the Arab view. Una, in his presentation, said that he did not feel that it was too much to ask that out of 2 million plus square miles of land, a tiny strip of 8,000 square miles be returned to a people who had been driven out 2,000 years before. He claimed that repatriation of Arab refugees was not practical and that they must be resettled in Arab lands, pointing out that Israel itself had absorbed 350,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands. He reminded readers that although Israel had been accused of aggressive acts, Egypt had been condemned 40 times by the United Nations Mixed Armistice Commission for various acts of murder and violence between August 1954 and March 1955. On the Arab side, Sayegh recounted that Jews and Arabs had lived peaceably together until Zionists began to boycott the use of Arab labor, and that such exclusiveness was expressly stated by Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann to have the objective of making Palestine, quote, as Jewish as England was English, unquote. Sayegh claimed that the only way the Jews had been able to purchase Arab land, as Weizmann had confessed, was sometimes through straw men, sometimes by bribes. During the 1948 war, the only reason Arabs fled their homes, Sayegh said, was fear of the Jewish troops and terrorists. They had not fled in response to appeals by Arab leaders, as the Jews had claimed. He cited the opinion of historian Arnold J. Toynbee. Toynbee had said, quote, if the heinousness of sin is to be measured by the degree to which the sinner is sinning against the light that God has vouchsafed to him, the Jews had even less excuse in AD 1948 for evicting Palestinian Arabs from their homes than Nebuchadnezzar and Titus and Hadrian and the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition had for uprooting, persecuting, and exterminating Jews in Palestine and elsewhere at diverse times in the past. In AD 1948, the Jews knew, this is still Toynbee talking, from personal experience what they were doing, and it was their supreme tragedy that the lesson learned by them from their encounter with the Nazi German Gentiles should have been not to eschew, but to imitate some of the evil deeds that the Nazis had committed against the Jews. That's the end of Toynbee's point. Sayegh recalled that Israel had been condemned by the Mixed Armistice Commission no less than 20 times for raids across the armistice lines, and claimed that no Arab state had ever been condemned by any United Nations organ for such raids on Jewish territory. He decried the discrimination against Arabs who had remained in Israel, being subjected to military government, suffering discrimination in citizenship requirements, receiving depressed wages, and being sentenced without trial. He supported his contentions from a Jewish source, William Zuckerman's Jewish newsletter, quote, a more flagrant case of discrimination is hard to find, even in the annals of the chauvinistic 20th century, unquote. Moody Monthly's July 1955 issue carried rebuttals of Carl Baer, executive director of the American Christian Palestine Committee, and Mr. Una. Una accused the Arabs of responsibility for the 1948 war by refusing to accept partition or any compromise and by invading Israeli territory. He failed to offer any reason why they should wish to compromise on the confiscation of their homeland. One telling point was his ridiculing of Sayeg's claim that no Arab state had been condemned. I fail to see any difference in the wordings of the respective United Nations Mixed Armistice Commission resolutions, he said, which frequently condemn the various Arab countries and those which much less frequently condemned Israel for defending its borders. End of quote. Arab claims of peaceful intentions were belied, he said, by statements such as that by Major Salah Salem, Egypt's Minister of Propaganda, printed in the Manchester Guardian. Quote, Egypt will strive to erase the shame of the Palestinian war, even if Israel should fulfill the United Nations resolutions. End of quote. Karl Baer observed that Sayegh had failed to remember the Arab massacre of 76 Hadassah doctors and nurses and the Security Council's double condemnation of the Arab blockade of Israeli shipping on the Suez Canal. His analysis was particularly acute when he observed that, quote, in the Arab-Israel impasse, we are not dealing with an issue in which one side is all white and the other all black. We have here conflict of rights as well as a confession of wrongs. End of quote. Even that much of a concession was enlightening to premillenarian readers. In his rebuttal, Sayegh chose to reinforce his earlier arguments and attempted to show that the official Zionist policy had been to dispossess Arabs of their land even before 1948. He cited the King-Crane Commission report to President Woodrow Wilson in 1919, which had mentioned the Jewish objective of complete dispossession. On the refugee issue, he quoted an American missionary's eyewitness report that the Jews had sent trucks equipped with loudspeakers through the Arab areas, threatening Arabs with annihilation if they did not leave. United Nations documents were offered as evidence that the Israelis had continued to expel and displace thousands of Arabs from the border zones even after the 1949 armistice agreements. Such presentations did not suddenly flush premillenarian prejudices away, but they did begin slightly to erode confidence in the righteousness of Israeli expansion. This broadening process of new knowledge undermined the self-confidence of narrow-mindedness. The Evangel magazine attempted to dull the cutting edge of Toynbee's criticism by reporting the response of Abba Eban, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Toynbee claimed that the traditional Jewish view had been that any restoration had to stem from divine initiative, not from human endeavor. Eban had replied, quote, it is true that the Hebrew Orthodox doctrine of history describes the restoration as a divine purpose, but it also describes it as a divine purpose which human effort should strive to accelerate. If something is willed by God, then it is the duty of man in his material life to strive for its fulfillment. I'll put in a link to the Watchtower House of Cards. This is specifically about the end of the book of Daniel, Daniel 11 and the beginning of 12, where we read the first explicit reference to the Great Tribulation. The Watchtower House of Cards is, of course, built upon the assumption that none of this is about Israel and Arab lands. Very hard to substantiate that from the text. So that video I'll put on your screen, Watchtower House of Cards and the Daniel playlist. See you next time.